Good afternoon, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. This is Rich again, back for your second video blog of the day for Monday, April 6, 2015, around 3:46 p.m. in Billerica, Massachusetts. It's a nice and sunny day, about 50 degrees, a little chilly for this time of year, but it's spring. Some news to report. JoJo White and Dikembe Mutombo have been voted into the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame. And that's about it on the news. My next video subject for today is about the regional professional wrestling territory, Georgia Championship Wrestling. Georgia Championship Wrestling was around for 40 years. It was a member of the National Wrestling Alliance for many years. It's known for being on 6:05 p.m. Eastern Saturday nights on WTBS, called by Gordon Soley, the Dean of Wrestling Announcers. It was one of the top regional territories in pro wrestling for many years. The start of Georgia Championship Wrestling happened in 1944 when a promoter by the name of Paul Jones, not Mr. One Paul Jones, but the wrestling promoter Paul Jones, started promoting wrestling cards in Atlanta. They would have weekly cards at the City Auditorium in Atlanta. Then they would go to Columbus, Georgia, Albany, Georgia, and other places in Georgia. And it was exciting territory. In 1960, they had a television program on Channel 11 in Atlanta. They filmed it at their TV studios, Channel 11. And also they had a couple of other promoters buy into it, like Ray Gunkill and others. In 1972, Georgia Championship Wrestling started running weekly cards and monthly cards for the big shows at the new Omni in Atlanta, Georgia. Plus, the TV show was moved from Channel 11 in Atlanta to then unknown Channel 17 in Atlanta, called it was called WTCG, and that was the same year that Gordon Soley started to call Georgia Championship Wrestling matches. He would call them for the next 12 years on television. And Georgia Championship Wrestling over the years had some great talent, like the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, the Road Warriors, Mr. Wrestling number 2, Mr. Wrestling number 1, the Assassins, the Ole Anderson, Lars Anderson, Gene Anderson, Tommy Wildfire Rich, the Armstrongs, Bullet Bob Armstrong, Brad Armstrong, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase was just Ted DiBiase, the Fabulous Freebirds, the Junkyard Dog, and so many others. And the major titles for Georgia Championship Wrestling were the National Champion, the Junior Heavyweight Champion, the Georgia Television title, and the Georgia Tag Team titles. In the late 70s, Jim Barnett became the promoter and booker for Georgia Championship Wrestling, and the 6:05 show on TBS for Georgia Championship Wrestling was shown throughout the United States. A lot of top talent wrestled for Georgia Championship Wrestling on TV, and then at the Omni in Atlanta, they had a very big feud in 1980 between the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and Ole Anderson. It started off at a tag team match where the Assassins faced off against Ole and Dusty. The special guest referee was Ivan Koloff and Gene Anderson. Ole turned on the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. That started a feud. Also, the Assassin feuded with Mr. Wrestling number 2. That was a classic feud. And the famous wrestler for Georgia Championship Wrestling of all time was Tommy Wildfire Rich. He was given an NWA title in for 4 days in April of 1981. He beat Harley Race, but he lost it back within 4 days. There's been rumors that Tommy Wildfire Rich got that NWA World title reign because this is an urban legend that he did some sexual favors to the promoter Jim Barnett. Jim Barnett was gay, but I don't know if those rumors are true or not, but that's been an urban legend and stuff like that. And Georgia Championship Wrestling continued to grow. They had the fabulous Freebirds there, Michael P.S. Hayes, Terry Bam Bam Gordy, and Buddy Roberts. They were famous for injuring Ted DiBiase's neck during pile drivers, and the Freebirds wreaked havoc in Georgia Championship Wrestling for about a year or so. In 1982, Georgia Championship Wrestling started to promote cards in Ohio and Detroit, Michigan. And also, Georgia Championship Wrestling was rebranded World Championship Wrestling for the program on WTBS because it was going nationwide and they didn't want to have Georgia Championship Wrestling. Also in 1982, Rowdy Piper joined the commentary team as a hero announcer with Gordon Solie, but eventually he turned face because the Magnificent Morocco was getting mad at Gordon Solie, ready to attack him. Piper turned face and feuded with the Magnificent Don Morocco. Also, Georgia Championship Wrestling had a big feud in 1982 between Tommy Wildfire Rich and Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. This feud was one of the best up and down the territory. The feud culminated with a classic steel cage match at the Omni in Atlanta with Paul Ellering, who was Buzz Sawyer's manager, held up in a steel cage. This was one of the best feuds of all time. And Georgia Championship Wrestling also got Jack and Jerry Briscoe as their new owners, along with Jim Barnett. Paul Jones owned it for many years, but he sold to Jim Barnett, and Jack and Jerry Briscoe bought into Georgia Championship Wrestling, and Ole Anderson bought into Georgia Championship Wrestling, and Georgia Championship Wrestling was going strong. They would sometimes have Ric Flair come in, and Bob Backlund, WWF champion, and Tony Atlas, Andre the Giant, and so many others. In 1983 was a very big year for Georgia Championship Wrestling. The Masked Superstar came in for a while, and then Ronnie Garvin and Jake the Snake Roberts, and a new tag team called the Legion of Doom, the World Warriors, with Hawk and Animal. They were awarded the Georgia Tag Team Championships, National Tag Team Championships. They defeated a team, but that was just a phantom title reign because they were so awesome and dominant. Even though they were heels, the fans still cheered them. They were managed by Precious Paul Ellering, and also the Legion of Doom was a faction which included the Spoiler, King Kong Bundy, and Jake the Snake Roberts. Jake the Snake Roberts was the national TV champion. He had a classic feud with the Hands of Stone, Ronnie Garvin, at Georgia Championship Wrestling, which lasted months and months. They had some great television matches on Superstation WTBS. That was a classic feud, Jake the Snake Roberts and Ronnie Garvin. They booked it. Jake the Snake was also the booker for Georgia Championship Wrestling. And also, they had another classic feud on Georgia Championship Wrestling around this time. Ted DiBiase beat Tommy Wildfire Rich in a loser leaves town match. Tommy Wildfire Rich came back under a mask called Mr. R, and everybody knew it was Tommy Wildfire Rich, but he was fooling the crowd and stuff like that. Eventually, Mr. R faced off against Ted DiBiase for the national championship, and then Ted DiBiase beat Mr. R, ripped off his mask, and then Tommy Wildfire Rich was at the announce position with Gordon Solie waving to the crowd, and then it was Brad Armstrong. Brad Armstrong rolls up Ted DiBiase for the 1, 2, 3. Ted DiBiase is irate, and Brad Armstrong's the new national champion and stuff like that. But behind the scenes, Georgia Championship Wrestling was going through major changes. Jack and Jerry Briscoe got control of Georgia Championship Wrestling off of Ole Anderson. And they were looking to sell Georgia Championship Wrestling, and they found a buyer. The buyer turned out to be Vince McMahon, who owned the WWF at the time, and he was rapidly expanding his Northeast promotion to buy into companies. The first one he did was to buy Georgia Championship Wrestling, and it was a secret deal. Ole Anderson did not know about it because Ole Anderson didn't like Vince McMahon at all. Jack and Jerry Briscoe received close to $900,000 apiece for selling Georgia Championship Wrestling to Vince McMahon. Georgia Championship Wrestling was dead and buried. Vince McMahon took over the time slot, and the guarantee was Jack and Jerry Briscoe would have lifetime jobs for the WWE. Jack wrestled for the WWE for a time along with Jerry, but Jack didn't like it, left. Jerry worked for the WWE for over 20 years. He's known as an on-air stooge for Mr. McMahon during the Attitude Era. And the program of World Championship Wrestling continued on TBS, but on July 14th, 1984, Golden Soley was no longer the voice of World Championship Wrestling at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. It was Vince McMahon. He was introduced by longtime Georgia Championship Wrestling ring announcer Freddie Miller, and Vince McMahon taped. They didn't tape too much WWF matches at the TBS studio, so it was previously taped WWE matches and stuff like that. A lot of people were irate, and Georgia Championship Wrestling ceased to exist as a promotion, and many of the and the national title was brought into the WWE, held by the Spoiler, because he went to the WWE as well. But there was new group Championship Wrestling from Georgia, which was briefly run by Ole Anderson, and they had some talent like Wahoo McDaniels, Jerry the King Lawler, and Ronnie Garvin, and Ox Baker, and Ted DiBiase, and a few others. They had a program at 7:35 in the morning, Saturdays on TBS, with like Gordon Soley announcing. Georgia Championship Wrestling was a great promotion, but it was a fact that when Vince McMahon started to take the WWF nationwide, the regional territories were going down, and Georgia Championship Wrestling was the first one they took down and stuff like that. It had a great run, having monthly cards at the Omni in Atlanta and stuff to blow off feuds. The Omni was like the Madison Square Garden of Georgia, which was pretty good and stuff like that. With some great angles and great stars that came out of Georgia Championship Wrestling. It's missed to this day, and there's not too much footage available of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Maybe the last year and a half of it was saved when WWE bought WCW. They got the tape library for like all of the programming WCW had in their vaults, and the last year and a half of Georgia Championship Wrestling is assumed to exist. The rest of it's been taped over, or some people have copies, but there's like second, third, fourth rate on a VHS or beta tape. And that's about it on Georgia Championship Wrestling. Well, tomorrow, for the regional wrestling territories, I'll continue on. I'll talk about Mid-South Wrestling and UWF, owned by Bill Watts. The third and final video blog of the night will be about George Mikan, Pro Basketball Hall of Fame and one of the greatest centers of all time, the first big name player to wear number 99. Have a good day, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Bye.